The cafe was buzzing with the usual morning crowd, a mix of people rushing to work, students with headphones on, and regulars sipping their coffee slowly while reading the newspaper. Sunlight poured in through the large windows, catching dust particles that danced in the warm light, making the room feel alive. Among the crowd, a man sat at a corner table, dressed in a crisp suit, his shoes polished to a shine and a gold watch glinting on his wrist. He had a presence that drew eyes without him even trying. People noticed when he entered and left, but today, he seemed more interested in observing than being noticed. Behind the counter, moving with quiet efficiency, was a young woman who worked there as a waitress. She had been at the cafe for a few years, and everyone knew her gentle smile, the way she remembered each regular's favorite order, and how she never seemed to be in a hurry, even on the busiest mornings. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she wore the simple uniform of the cafe, but there was something about the way she carried herself, calm, confident, and completely at ease, that made her stand out without her even trying. As she carried a tray of steaming coffees across the floor, she noticed the man in the corner staring in her direction. Usually she wouldn't pay much attention, but there was something different about the way he was looking at her. It wasn't the usual glance of someone curious or bored. It was a look of intrigue, of someone who wanted to see something unexpected. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the customers at other tables, pouring coffee, taking orders, and making sure everyone had what they needed. After a few minutes, the man finally stood up and walked toward her table. His steps were measured, almost deliberate, as if he were preparing to make an entrance rather than just approach someone. The cafe seemed to quiet slightly, though not completely. People didn't stop their conversations, but there was a subtle shift in energy, a feeling that something unusual was about to happen. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but with a hint of amusement. "I've been watching you work for a few minutes now. You seem talented." She blinked, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to strangers complimenting her in such a serious way, especially not someone who looked like he had everything he could ever want. "Thank you," she said cautiously. "I just do my job." "No, I mean more than that," he said, smiling slightly. "I see how confident you are, how calm you are even when the cafe is busy. It's rare. It makes me curious. Do you have other talents?" She hesitated, unsure if he was joking or serious. Most people didn't ask questions like this. Most people ordered their coffee, ate their breakfast, and left. But something about him made her pause. She felt a spark of curiosity herself. "Maybe," she said slowly. "I guess it depends on what you mean by talent." He glanced toward the corner of the cafe, where a piano sat unused for most of the day. Its black surface gleamed under the sunlight, and the keys looked inviting, waiting for someone to play them. "That," he said, gesturing to the piano, "is what I mean. I bet you couldn't sit down and play that piano like a professional." Her eyes widened slightly. It wasn't that she couldn't play, it was just that no one had ever asked her to, especially not a stranger who seemed to be testing her. The piano was her secret. She had studied music for years in private, performing only at small recitals. Never in public, and certainly not in front of a wealthy stranger who could judge her every note. But something inside her stirred. She felt a mix of excitement and challenge, a small thrill she hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't know if you really want to see that," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. It's been a long time since I've played in front of anyone." The man smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "All the better," he said. "That's exactly why I want to see it. Life is too short for hidden talent. Show me what you can do if you dare." The cafe felt quieter suddenly, though the usual background noise of clinking cups and soft chatter continued. Other customers noticed the interaction, whispering quietly among themselves, curious to see what would happen next. Some of them had seen him before, a man who seemed to have everything, someone who usually gave orders rather than asking questions. Seeing him genuinely curious and a little playful made them lean in. She took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. No one had dared her to do something like this before. She had always been careful, always cautious about showing her true abilities outside of the small, safe world she had created, but today felt different. She could feel a quiet determination building inside her, a need to show herself what she was capable of, even if it was just for this moment. "Okay," she said finally with a small, confident smile. "I'll play." The man's eyes lit up with surprise, though he quickly hid it behind a polite nod. "Excellent," he said. "I'm looking forward to it." She walked toward the piano, each step deliberate, feeling the eyes of the cafe on her. It was strange, and yet she didn't feel afraid. Instead, she felt a rush of energy, the kind she only felt when she was about to do something meaningful, something that mattered just for her. She sat down on the bench, straightened her back, and let her fingers hover above the keys for a moment. The cafe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her first note. Then she pressed the first key, and a soft, clear note filled the room. She started with something simple, a melody that was gentle and inviting. The man leaned forward slightly, watching her fingers move with precision and grace. Other customers started to notice, turning in their chairs, pausing their conversations. The sound was unexpected in a place where most people only came for coffee and a quick bite. It was as if the piano had been waiting for someone like her to bring it to life. With each note, she felt more confident. Her nerves faded, replaced by focus and the joy of playing. She wasn't performing for the man, or for the cafe, or for anyone else. She was performing for herself, and that made every note stronger, more vibrant. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, creating a melody that was both soothing and captivating. The air in the cafe seemed to change. The clatter of dishes, the soft chatter, even the hum of the espresso machine faded into the background. All that mattered was the music and the way it made everyone who heard it feel. The man watched her, fascinated. He had expected something, perhaps a little talent, maybe an amateur attempt at playing. But what he was hearing now was something entirely different. It wasn't just skill, it was emotion, expression, a story told through music. He could see the passion in her eyes, the way she let herself be vulnerable yet strong at the same time. It stunned him, and he realized that he had underestimated her entirely. Other customers were noticing too. Some whispered to each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. A few moved closer to the piano, drawn by the sound, their morning routines forgotten. Even the baristas behind the counter paused for a moment, caught in the unexpected beauty of the music. The cafe was no longer just a place to eat and drink, it had become a small theater. And she was the star. As the final note of her piece lingered in the air, there was a moment of silence. Everyone held their breath, unsure whether to clap, not wanting to break the spell she had created. Then slowly, one person started to clap. Another joined in, and soon the entire cafe was applauding. The sound was loud, genuine, and filled with admiration. She smiled quietly. Standing up from the piano, her cheeks slightly flushed but her eyes shining. She returned to her station as if nothing extraordinary had happened, taking orders and serving drinks with her usual calm efficiency. But the atmosphere in the cafe had changed. People looked at her differently now. They saw not just a waitress, but someone who had talent, courage, and a quiet strength that could surprise anyone. The man in the corner sat back, a small smile playing on his lips. He had come to the cafe thinking he would entertain himself, perhaps tease someone for fun. Instead, he had witnessed something extraordinary. He realized that talent could be hidden in the most unexpected places, and sometimes all it took was a small dare to bring it to light. That morning, the cafe had witnessed more than just a piano performance. It had witnessed a moment of bravery, a spark of passion, and the beginning of something that could change a life. And although the day went on, with customers coming and going, serving coffee and pastries as usual, the memory of that moment lingered, quietly, like the last note of a beautiful song that refuses to fade. After the first few notes from the piano had faded, the cafe returned to its usual rhythm, or so it seemed. But for the young waitress, everything had changed. She felt a spark inside her, a warmth that had been quiet for years. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like just a waitress moving between tables. She felt alive, noticed not for serving coffee or remembering orders, but for something deeply personal, something that belonged entirely to her. The man in the corner leaned back in his chair. watching her with a curiosity that had grown into genuine interest. He had expected maybe a small show, a fleeting moment of skill, but what he had just heard was real. It was raw, full of emotion, and more importantly, it was authentic. His eyes followed her every move, not in judgment but in anticipation. Wondering what she might do next. She wiped her hands on her apron, pretending to be busy with the next order, but her mind was racing. The piano wasn't going anywhere, and the thought of playing more, letting herself really dive into the music, was tempting. A quiet voice inside her said, "This is your moment. Don't hold back." Slowly, she walked back to the piano. Customers leaned forward, some standing slightly to get a better view. The cafe, which had felt normal just minutes ago, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to do something extraordinary. She took a deep breath and sat down, this time letting herself feel the keys beneath her fingers. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant, but then she found her rhythm. She began a piece she had practiced many times but never performed in front of strangers. It was a melody that told a story, one of hope and struggle, joy and longing. With each note, she poured a little of herself into the music, and slowly the cafe around her seemed to fade away. All that existed was the sound, the vibration of the keys, and the energy that built with every chord. People watched in silence. Some had tears in their eyes without realizing why. The music spoke to them in a way that words never could. A businessman sipping his coffee stopped mid-sip, captivated. A mother with a small child froze, letting the melody wash over her while the child leaned against her quietly. Even the staff behind the counter stopped their chatter, listening as if the world outside the cafe had disappeared. The man in the corner couldn't help but smile, though it was different now. This wasn't about curiosity or entertainment anymore. He felt a deep respect for the woman at the piano. He realized that this wasn't just talent. It was courage. It took something special to step forward, to show the world a part of yourself that you usually keep hidden. He had challenged her, but she had risen to it in a way that surpassed any expectation. As she continued to play, she began to add her own improvisations. Notes that weren't written anywhere came to life under her fingers, weaving a story that felt both personal and universal. Some of the customers leaned closer, drawn in by the sound, unable to look away. A few quietly took out their phones, recording the performance, knowing they were witnessing something rare. The music built gradually, rising and falling, flowing like a river of emotion. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, but there was a sense of freedom in the way she played, a willingness to let go and let the music guide her. The cafe was no longer just a cafe. It had become a stage, and she was the only performer, commanding the attention of everyone present without a word. At one point, a soft gasp came from a table near the window. A man had leaned too far forward, overwhelmed by the beauty of the music. Others turned to see what had caused the sound, but they didn't need to ask. The music was explanation enough. It spoke of things that people often forgot in their busy lives: patience, courage, and the simple joy of discovering something beautiful unexpectedly. The waitress didn't notice the gasps or the stares. She was entirely in the moment, lost in the rhythm and the melody. Each note was a conversation between her heart and the piano, a story that only she could tell. The challenge had started as a dare from a stranger, but now it had become something much more significant. It was a statement of who she was, a reminder to herself that talent, when nurtured, could never truly stay hidden forever. The man in the corner shifted in his seat, leaning slightly forward. He had seen many things in his life, experienced a lot, but this was new. The raw authenticity of what he was witnessing left him silent for a long moment. He thought about how many people went through life hiding their true abilities, how fear or doubt kept them from showing the world what they were capable of. And here was someone who had dared to show it, not for recognition or reward, but simply because it was who she was. As the melody reached its peak, a hush fell over the cafe. The notes were loud, yet delicate, powerful, yet full of warmth. She played with everything she had, letting the music tell the story she had kept inside for so long. Patrons sat in awe, mesmerized by her talent and the emotion she poured into it. Some whispered to each other, unsure if they had ever heard anything like this before in a cafe. Others were silent, not wanting to interrupt the magic of the moment. When the last note finally lingered and faded, the cafe stayed quiet for a heartbeat longer, as if afraid to break the spell. Then gradually applause began. It started softly, one or two people clapping, and quickly grew louder, until the entire room was clapping, cheering, and whistling. The sound was overwhelming. And yet it wasn't just for the skill, it was for the courage, the bravery, the beauty of someone daring to share a hidden part of themselves with the world. She stood from the piano, a little out of breath, her cheeks flushed but her eyes shining with quiet pride. She smiled politely, thanked the audience with a small nod, and returned to her station. But now, when she moved between tables, it was different. She felt lighter, stronger, more confident. People looked at her differently too, not just as the waitress who served coffee, but as someone remarkable, someone who had just shown them the unexpected magic that could exist in everyday life. The man in the corner was silent for a moment, lost in thought. He had come to the cafe expecting nothing more than a distraction, maybe a little entertainment, but he had witnessed something extraordinary. He realized that challenges weren't always about proving superiority. Sometimes they were about uncovering hidden potential, about giving someone the opportunity to shine in a way they hadn't before. And she had done that beautifully, gracefully, and without hesitation. As the cafe returned to its usual rhythm, people continued to talk quietly among themselves, still replaying the performance in their minds. Some complimented her as she passed by with trays, others just stared, shaking their heads in amazement. She handled it all with her usual calm, but inside she felt a quiet sense of triumph. She had stepped into a moment of courage and come out on the other side, feeling more like herself than she had in years. The man in the corner finally stood up, walking toward the counter as she finished delivering an order. He didn't speak immediately, just observed her as she moved gracefully between tables, serving customers with a natural ease that now seemed infused with something extra, a quiet confidence, a sense of presence that was undeniable. Finally he spoke. "I underestimated you," he said, not as a criticism but as a statement of fact. "I thought this would be a small game, a little entertainment. I didn't expect that." He gestured toward the piano, as if words could not fully capture what he had just experienced. She smiled faintly, nodding. "I told you," she said quietly. "It's not really about showing off. It's just something I love to do." He paused, then nodded slowly, a rare moment of humility crossing his features. "It's more than talent," he said. "It's heart. And you have a lot of it." For a brief moment, the two of them stood there, not as stranger and challenger, but as two people who had shared a rare, unspoken connection. The cafe buzzed around them, but in that small space near the piano, time seemed to pause, allowing the impact of her music and her courage to settle into the room and linger quietly. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Customers came and went, orders were taken, coffee was poured, but the memory of the performance remained fresh. People whispered about it, shared their excitement with friends, and even some regulars returned just to see if it had really happened. And for the young waitress, it was more than a memory, it was a turning point. She had dared to take a risk, to show herself and the world a part of herself that had long remained hidden. By the time the cafe quieted down for lunch, a small crowd had gathered near the piano, asking if she might play again. She shook her head politely, smiling, but inside she felt a growing sense of possibility. Today had been a moment, yes, but it had opened a door she hadn't realized was there. And she knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of something much larger. Even the man in the corner, who had come to challenge her, now left the cafe with a newfound respect. He had come expecting to amuse himself, but he left carrying a story, a memory, and a lesson about the courage it takes to show the world who you truly are. And somewhere along the way, he realized that sometimes the people you least expect are the ones who leave the biggest impression. The next few days after her performance felt almost unreal to the young waitress. The cafe was still the same in many ways, coffee orders, clattering cups, the hum of conversation, but something had changed. People noticed her differently now. Regular customers who had once greeted her with a casual good morning now smiled with recognition, and strangers stopped by, curious to see the woman who had played the piano in a way that had left the cafe buzzing for days. At first, she didn't quite know how to react to the attention. She had always preferred to stay in the background, quietly doing her job, and never imagined anyone would take notice of her beyond that. But now, with people watching her, complimenting her, and even asking when she might play again, she felt a mix of pride and nervousness. It was exciting, yes, but it was also strange to be seen in a new light. Word of the piano performance began to spread quickly, far beyond the walls of the small cafe. Someone had recorded a few seconds on their phone and posted it online, and almost instantly, people began to share it. The video circulated through social media, accompanied by captions like, "You won't believe this waitress's talent," and "hidden skills revealed in a coffee shop." Within hours, the clip had thousands of views, and people from across the city were talking about it. The young waitress watched this all unfold with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. She had never expected anything like this. Music had always been a private part of her life, something she did quietly, away from prying eyes. But now, it felt as if the whole city was peeking into that private corner of her life. The thought was both thrilling and intimidating. Even the man who had challenged her returned to the cafe a few days later. He didn't make a scene, just quietly observed from his usual corner table. He had been impressed before, but now, seeing the attention she was receiving, he realized that the performance had been more than just a moment. It had changed the way people saw her. He could tell she was starting to understand her own power, and he felt a sense of pride in having encouraged her to take that first step. The young waitress found herself thinking about the piano constantly. She had never realized how much she missed playing freely in front of others. When she was behind the counter, taking orders and pouring coffee, her mind often wandered to melodies she wanted to try, chords she wanted to explore, and the way her fingers had moved across the keys that morning. Music had always been a quiet companion, but now it seemed to be calling her out into the world. As more people learned about her, invitations began to come in. A small local art gallery asked if she would play at an evening event. A community center invited her to perform for a charity gathering. Even one of the city's music schools reached out, offering a chance to join a short recital program. Each invitation made her heart race. She had dreamed of opportunities like this, but never imagined they would arrive so suddenly, and all because she had dared to accept a challenge in a cafe. At the same time, she felt a growing pressure. Playing in the cafe had been intimate, safe, and personal. Now, with larger crowds and wider attention, the stakes felt higher. She wondered if she could live up to the expectations of people who had seen only a few minutes of her talent online. Doubt crept in, whispering that maybe this was a mistake, that perhaps she wasn't ready for the attention and responsibility that came with it. One afternoon, as she wiped down the tables after a busy morning, she overheard a group of customers discussing her. "Did you see the video online?" one asked. Her fingers moved like magic. "How can someone be that good without anyone knowing?" Another added, "I think she's going to be famous." That was incredible. Hearing this, she felt a flutter of nervous excitement. People believed in her even when she doubted herself. It was a strange and powerful feeling, realizing that her talent could inspire others even without her trying. For the first time, she understood that music wasn't just about personal enjoyment. It could touch lives, bring people together, and create moments of awe and connection. The man in the corner, noticing her uncertainty, spoke to her quietly one morning. "Don't let the attention scare you," he said. "You have something rare. People will recognize it, but it's up to you what you do with it. Don't rush. Just play because you love it, and everything else will follow." His words resonated with her. She realized that this journey wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about sharing what she loved in whatever way felt right. She could choose to continue playing in the cafe, small but meaningful, or explore bigger opportunities that were beginning to open up. The choice was hers, and that freedom gave her a sense of control and confidence she hadn't felt before. That evening, After her shift, she returned to the piano. The cafe was quiet now, only a few remaining customers lingering with their coffee. She sat down on the bench and let her fingers touch the keys. This time there was no audience, no challenge, no expectation. It was just her and the piano. She played slowly, letting the music flow without thinking about technique or skill. The notes carried her emotions, her dreams, and her fears. Playing like this reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about expression, about pouring a piece of herself into something beautiful. She realized that every challenge, every performance, and every note had brought her closer to understanding her own strength and creativity. The next few days were a whirlwind. More people came to the cafe, hoping to hear her play. Some brought friends, others just stopped in out of curiosity. The manager of the cafe, noticing the attention, asked if she could play once a week for a short session. She agreed, knowing it was a way to share her music without feeling overwhelmed. Each time she played, more people gathered, and the atmosphere in the cafe changed. It became a place where people came not just for coffee, but for the experience of listening to someone pour their heart into music. Social media continued to amplify her story. Videos and photos of her playing circulated widely, and messages of encouragement poured in from people she would never meet. Some shared their own experiences with hidden talents, inspired by her courage. Others simply commented on how uplifting it was to see someone embrace their passion so fully. For her, it was overwhelming but also affirming. She realized that a simple act of daring to play had rippled far beyond what she could have imagined. Through it all, she remained grounded. She still worked at the cafe, still served coffee and pastries, and still greeted customers with her gentle smile. But something had shifted inside her. She no longer saw herself as just a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, and someone capable of reaching others through her art. The recognition was new, but the joy of playing had always been hers. And that was what truly mattered. The man who had challenged her continued to visit occasionally. He watched quietly, sometimes offering a nod of approval, sometimes just observing from a distance. He had become a subtle mentor, someone who reminded her to stay true to herself, to embrace her talent without fear, and to take opportunities as they came. His presence was comforting, not because of his wealth or status, but because he understood the power of encouragement and belief in someone else's potential. One afternoon, as she played for a small gathering in the cafe, she noticed a young boy sitting near the window, listening intently. His eyes were wide, his hands clasped together, as if he were seeing something magical for the first time. She smiled, remembering herself at that age, dreaming quietly in her room, hoping one day to share her music with the world. Seeing him reminded her why she had taken the risk in the first place: to inspire, to share, and to connect through something beautiful and real. By the end of the week, she had begun to plan small performances outside the cafe. A local community center invited her to play for a charity event, and a nearby gallery offered her a chance to perform at an opening night. Each invitation was a new opportunity, a chance to step into a world she had only glimpsed before. She felt nervous but excited. The thought of sharing her music with more people made her heart race, but it also gave her a sense of purpose. Through it all, she kept returning to the piano in the cafe. No matter how much attention she received, no matter how many people wanted to see her perform, she always came back to this small, familiar space. Here, she could play freely, without pressure, and remember why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Each note was a reminder of her journey, her courage, and the unexpected way a simple dare had changed everything. She realized that life had a way of surprising you. One small moment accepting a challenge, daring to do something you love, could grow into something far greater than you imagined. And while the recognition was thrilling, the true reward was discovering her own strength, her own voice, and the joy of sharing it with others. By the end of part 3, she had started to see a new future for herself, one where music could be a central part of her life, not just a hidden talent. She knew the road ahead would have challenges and doubts, but she also knew she had taken the first step, and that was enough to keep moving forward. The morning sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting a warm glow on the polished tables and wooden floors. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, blending with the faint aroma of pastries just out of the oven. It was another busy day, but there was a subtle excitement in the atmosphere, an energy that had been building since the young waitress's piano performance went viral. People were coming not just for coffee, but for the chance to witness something extraordinary, something that had started as a quiet secret and grown into a story everyone wanted to see for themselves. She moved through the cafe with her usual calm efficiency, carrying trays of coffee and plates of food. Her smile was gentle and natural, but there was a quiet confidence in her step that hadn't been there before. Regular customers noticed it immediately. They had seen her play before, some online, some live. And now she carried herself differently. As if she knew she could handle whatever came next, the piano sat in its usual corner, polished black keys gleaming in the sunlight. Today she didn't hesitate. She approached it with purpose, feeling the familiar smoothness under her fingers. She sat on the bench, straightened her back, and glanced around the cafe. People were already gathering, some whispering to each other, some holding their phones, ready to record. But she wasn't playing for them, at least not entirely. She was playing for herself, for the love of the music that had brought her here in the first place. Her fingers touched the keys gently at first, producing a soft, clear note that drew every eye in the room. She began with a melody that was familiar, soothing, and gradually built it into something more complex. As she played, she felt the music flowing through her, a wave of emotion that carried both her nervousness and her excitement. Each note was precise yet free, expressing everything she had felt since the first day. She had dared to play in front of the cafe crowd. The man who had challenged her returned that day, as he often did, watching quietly from his corner. But he wasn't the only one observing. Today, there were new faces, people who had heard about the performance online, who had traveled across town just to see her play. Some came in groups, whispering in excitement, trying to remain unnoticed, but their awe was impossible to hide. Others sat quietly, waiting for the first few notes. Knowing that something special was about to happen, she didn't speak. There was no need. The music said everything. It filled the room with emotion, weaving a story that connected everyone present. Some of the cafe staff paused mid-task, entranced by the sound. Customers stopped eating, leaning forward to catch every note. Even people who had come in expecting only a cup of coffee found themselves caught in the spell of the performance. It wasn't just music, it was an experience, a living, breathing thing that seemed to rise from the piano and wrap itself around the audience. As she continued to play, she began to improvise, letting her fingers explore new patterns and rhythms. Each improvisation carried a piece of her heart, a story of the quiet determination, struggles, and small victories that had led her to this moment. The music became more than notes on a scale. It became a reflection of her life, her courage, and her journey. She played with a freedom she had never felt before, letting the music lead her instead of the other way around. The cafe reacted instantly. Some customers had tears in their eyes, moved by the beauty and honesty of the performance. A few whispered to each other, unsure how to describe what they were feeling. Others sat in stunned silence, letting the music wash over them without distraction. The room was alive with emotion, and every person there was connected, if only for a few minutes, by the melody that had poured from her fingers. The man in the corner watched, his expression a mixture of pride and astonishment. He had seen her before, and he had known she was talented, but what he was witnessing now went beyond skill. This was courage, passion, and authenticity combined. It was the kind of performance that could change how people saw her, and maybe even how she saw herself. At one point, the melody swelled into a powerful, almost cinematic crescendo. The notes bounced and shimmered in the sunlight, echoing softly against the walls of the cafe. She leaned into the piano, fully immersed in the moment, her hair falling slightly over her face as she played. Patrons were leaning forward in their seats, some holding their hands to their chest, overwhelmed by the intensity and emotion of the music. Even the cafe staff paused, caught in the magic of something that had started so quietly. yet had grown into a moment none of them would forget after the crescendo. She shifted into a gentler, more delicate passage. The contrast made the room even more alive, creating a rhythm of tension and release that held everyone's attention. People who had come in with only casual curiosity were now captivated, unable to look away, their hearts moving with the ebb and flow of the music. Some subtly recorded the performance, knowing that what they were witnessing was rare and special. The performance lasted longer than anyone expected. She played not for attention, not for praise, but because she wanted to, because the music demanded it. And every note carried her energy, her determination, and the small bravery it had taken to step into this space and share her gift. By the time she reached the final chord, the room was completely silent, as if everyone was holding their breath to savor the last note. Then came the applause. It started slowly, a polite clap here, a soft cheer there, and then grew into a roar of appreciation and awe. Patrons stood, clapping enthusiastically, some whistling, others shouting words of praise. Even the staff, who had seen her play countless times now, couldn't contain their excitement. The applause was more than recognition. It was gratitude, admiration, and a celebration of courage and talent. She stood from the piano, slightly out of breath, cheeks flushed, but her eyes shining with quiet joy. She bowed politely, acknowledging the audience, then returned to her station, resuming her work with trays of coffee and food. But now, every step she took carried a new weight of recognition that she was no longer just a waitress in this cafe. She was someone whose talent and courage could inspire and connect people. Someone who had stepped into her own light and refused to hide it. The man in the corner finally stood as well. He approached her quietly, not to disrupt the moment, but to offer words that he hoped would matter. "You've done more than play," he said softly. "You've shown people what courage looks like. You've reminded them and me what it means to take a risk and be true to yourself." She smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I just played," she said quietly, though she knew it had been more than that. It had been a declaration, a story, a moment of honesty that could never be taken back. By the afternoon, the story of her performance had already begun to spread further. People who hadn't been in the cafe that morning were talking about it online, sharing videos, and expressing their admiration. Local journalists and bloggers were curious, reaching out for interviews. The attention was growing rapidly, but she remained grounded, focused on the music itself rather than the fame it could bring. She knew that the joy she felt came from the act of playing, from sharing her heart through her fingers, and that was something no one could take away. In the coming days, the cafe became a small hub of excitement. Regulars looked forward to her performances, newcomers came with expectations of being amazed, and staff members felt a quiet pride in having such talent under their roof. But for her, the most important part remained the same, the connection she felt with the music and the people who listened. Each note was a conversation, a way to speak without words, a way to share something that couldn't be measured in money, likes, or views. That day, as she closed the cafe and cleaned up, she sat once more at the piano. The room was empty now, quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. She played slowly, deliberately, letting each note linger, savoring the feeling of being fully present. She thought about the way people had reacted, the way the music had touched them, and the way her own courage had allowed it to happen. It was a powerful realization, one that gave her confidence for the future. She realized that her journey was just beginning. Today had been a moment of triumph, but there were still paths to explore, challenges to accept, and music to create. And while the attention and recognition were exciting, they were secondary. The true reward was in the act of playing itself, in the courage to share, and in the connections she had made through something as simple and beautiful as a melody. By the time she finally stood, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cafe floor. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and anticipation. Tomorrow and the days after would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new moments to create. But tonight, she carried with her the memory of a morning that had started like any other and ended in a way she would never forget. It was a reminder that sometimes the bravest step is simply saying yes. saying yes to a challenge, yes to a risk, yes to showing the world who you truly are. And when you do, the results can be more extraordinary than you ever imagined.